Okay, we were just talking about fate and love of fate and the importance that recognizing fate or destiny has in achieving equanimity and with all the things that happen to a person in their life. The next one is correct use of impressions. This again is a big deal. Epictetus talked about this a lot. The correct use of impressions. And what he meant by that is you have to cultivate. This is not something that you can just intellectually think about once and it's done. It's something that you have to think about over and over again. It is an intellectual exercise, but it's one that requires requires that you address it repeatedly. So that's why he said cultivate right impressions. So if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your own estimate of it. It's a very important concept for the Stoics. And Shakespeare believed that. Shakespeare probably read the Stoics. I don't know if he got this specific statement from them, but in Hamlet, he says, "There's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so." There's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So Shakespeare certainly had a Stoic thought when he said that. So we do have control over our on how we react to things. You may not have control over the thing that happens to you, but you do have control over how you react to it. This is from Milton. "The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell and a hell of heaven." Same Stoic concept. And again, he may well have gotten it from the Stoics. So cultivate right impressions. You have the power to address. Viktor Frankl talked about this in his Man's Search for Meaning as well. The one thing that they did have control over in the concentration camps was the only thing they had control over was how they mentally reacted to what was happening to them. Okay, the next essential Stoic tenet. Virtue trumps all other characteristics, and we could substitute integrity. Perhaps that's a better word. Virtue sounds a little goody two-shoes, but integrity, you could say, trumps all other characteristics. And I personally think that that is absolutely true. Virtue is everything. And again, Socrates talked about this, and not just Socrates, but other Greeks before the Stoics talked about the extreme centrality of virtue and integrity in a flourishing life. So, to what must we aspire, says Marcus Aurelius? The just thought, the unselfish act, the tongue that utters no falsehood, the temper that greets each passing event as something predestined. Here again we get that fate thing coming up. Expected and emanating from the one source and origin. And again, virtue is not something you can just say, okay, I'm going to be virtuous. It's something that you have to make a habit. Integrity is something that you have to make a habit. It has to be, we all fall short. It's not a matter that any of us can achieve this. But it's just like with objectivity with regard to science and other fields. If objectivity is not your central focus, you're going to fall way short. And the same thing in living our lives. If integrity is not your central focus, even though you fall short over and over again, then you're going to fall way short if it's not an important characteristic for you. Again, Marcus Aurelius, your mind will be like its habitual thoughts, for the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Heraclitus, even before Socrates, one of the pre-Socratics, said something very similar to this, that your character is from your thoughts. Compassion for humans and animals. The Stoics were not like the Epicureans who wanted to just remove themselves from society and go off and hang out with their friends, eating simple foods and etc., and not becoming involved as the Epicureans. The Stoics believed in compassion and action to help others. And that was an important part. Acting in the world was an important part of the Stoic philosophy. So, as Marcus Aurelius says here, he does not forget the brotherhood of all rational beings, nor that a concern for every man is proper for humanity, to humanity. Simplicity. I've already mentioned this briefly, but simplicity, that from the standpoint that riches are not the path to happiness. As they said, integrity is the path to happiness, and right actions. That's the path to happiness. Riches don't have much impact on that. So again, Marcus Aurelius, remember that the needs of a happy life are very few. And this coming from the Emperor of Rome. But again, as I said, when he was in Rome in the palaces, that was fine. When he was out in the Danube or somewhere else, that was fine as well. Now, this acquisitiveness and greed that is so prominent today, of course, it's never been any different, but some current psychologists and philosophers have called this hedonic adaptation. When a person has a certain level of income and that goes up substantially, there may be joy or happiness that goes with that increase, but very soon the person gets used to it. And this happens to, at least in the past, it may not happen as much anymore, but in the past, people did have increases in their income periodically over life, and even if they were substantial, it usually didn't take very long, a month or two or maybe 6 months, and they adapted to this new increased level, and they were no happier then than they were before. It's a matter of having, once you have enough to eat, and you have a roof over your head, and you have some medical care, etc., and maybe a few wants rather than needs, increasing that amount of, the amount of income that you have really has very little to do with your overall happiness. It may increase it a little, but, and it's usually temporary. So hedonic adaptation precludes increasing income producing a permanent increase in your happiness. Okay, a few more of the essential Stoic tenets. Magnanimity in dealing with others. Being magnanimous, this was a big thing for the Stoics. And again, Marcus Aurelius talking, remember the doctrine that all rational beings are created for one another, that toleration is a part of justice, and that men are not intentional evildoers. Again, back to this, the Socratic view that it's only through ignorance that people are mean to other people or bad to other people. So belief in fate breeds magnanimity. If you believe that things are largely, not completely, but are largely fated, then that allows you to be more magnanimous towards other human beings. There's little or no free will. There can be no, if you go all the way to saying there is no free will, of course, then there can be no immoral actions. But if you just go part of the way towards that, you still admit that people do have free will, but that an enormous amount of their behavior is either subconscious or caused by other things, then it does breed magnanimity. It doesn't preclude punishing evildoers or anything like that, but it causes you to be a little bit more magnanimous towards your fellow humans. And again, I'm not saying that I do this all the time. I'm just saying that this is what the Stoics were promoting. This view contributed substantially to Nietzsche's view about morals. Nietzsche felt, like the Stoics, that an awful lot of what happens is due to fate. And Nietzsche was, I mean, he would hate to be called this, but he was a very nice person. And he did have a lot of magnanimity towards other people's foibles. So you may not realize that if you haven't read a lot of Nietzsche, but he really was, his writings were very polemical, but they weren't mean by and large. They weren't intended to be mean, they were intended to make people think. Equanimity in the face of adversity. This is another, there's overlap with a lot of these things, where you know, the essential tenets that I'm going through, there is overlap. But when bad things happen to you, the Stoic outlook can help immeasurably. Do unsavory, again, Marcus Aurelius, do unsavory armpits and bad breath make you angry? What good will it do you? And here again, the Emperor of Rome, who could have had anybody with bad breath executed, or at least had their breath improved, and he just overlooked all of that. It wasn't important to him. By the way, a lot of people have wondered whether they would be able to be as magnanimous as Marcus Aurelius. if you think of all the people in your life, if you were emperor and could have anything done to anybody, you wouldn't want to have them killed probably, but you could have anything done to anybody. How many of us would be able to resist that temptation? I can think of several people right now that, well, anyway. Humility, even with fame and fortune. And Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, he didn't let it go to his head, unlike a lot of people who earn fame and fortune these days. Marcus says, "Keep before your eyes the swift onset of oblivion and the abysses of eternity before us and behind. Mark how hollow are the echoes of applause, how fickle and undiscerning the judgments of professed admirers, and how puny the arena of human fame." A good thing for all of us to remember should we have our 15 minutes of fame. Turning adversity into an advantage. In my personal view, this is one of the most important of the Stoic tenets. The last one I'll talk about actually is the most important, but this one is probably second. A perfect example, the Dutch anatomist Philip Verheyen, in the late 1600s, I don't know what problem he had with his left leg, but it had to be amputated. And I can only imagine what it was like to have your leg amputated in those days before we had anesthesia, etc. I don't know what they did, how much alcohol they gave them, or how many bullets to bite, but it must have been an incredible ordeal. And here's a painting of him. Because he was an anatomist, instead of just sitting around moping about the fact that he had to have his leg cut off, he proceeded to dissect the leg. And actually, he's the one that named the Achilles tendon. And that's what you probably can't see that, but that's what he's working on right there, is the Achilles tendon. So he used this terrible event and transformed it into something that was positive, and something for which we still recognize him today. So hindrances to progress are merely converted into matter for its own use, says Marcus. And so when you're faced with adversity, one of the first things that one can think about is there some way I can transform this event, not some other thing, but can I transform this adverse event into something that is positive? And many times the answer is yes. Maybe not right away, but at some time in the future, you oftentimes can do that. So here's Marcus again saying, "It's like a bonfire mastering a heap of rubbish, which would have quenched a feeble flow, but its fiery blaze quickly assimilates the load, consumes it, and flames the higher for it." So that's what he says. It flames the higher for it. In other words, all of this adversity then allows the flame to be higher, allows the person to counteract it and come out ahead in the long run. Interestingly, C.S. Lewis has a saying. It's a bit longer than this, but it's virtually identical. And I don't know if he attributed this, but it was very clear to me that C.S. Lewis either knowingly or unknowingly appropriated Marcus Aurelius' statement here to one of his own writings. Give all your attention to turning the event itself, into some good account. In this way you will be making the best use of it, and it will serve you as working material. Again, Marcus Aurelius talking about converting adversity into a positive outcome. Okay, duty and discipline for a good life. I'm going to pause here again, and we will pick this up with the next YouTube.